Hi folks, and welcome to another edition of Government Matters. My name is Mike Dobbs. I'm managing editor for Reminder Publications. And today it's our pleasure and privilege to talk to a frequent visitor from the Baker administration to Western Massachusetts, Jay Ash, who is the Secretary of Housing and Economic Development. Thanks very much for coming.
Hey Mike, thanks for having me.
One of the purposes of this show is just to try to connect people with elements of government, both local and statewide. So you're in an elevator and there's a guy standing there and you introduce yourself. What's your elevator pitch to describe what you do as Secretary for the Commonwealth?
Yeah, well, as you noted, I'm the Secretary of Housing and Economic Development, but when Governor Baker called me to ask me to serve in his cabinet, I didn't quite appreciate the full breadth of my job. So in addition to being the Secretary of Housing and Economic Development, I'm also in charge of banking, insurance, and consumer affairs. So I have a wide breadth of responsibility for aspects of government that interface with the public. The main parts are economic development and housing and affordable housing. But I get to touch upon a number of sectors and interact with employers, interact with communities, and most of all, interact with people who are looking to prosper.
Now, let's start a little bit about housing, since that's the first thing in here.
Yes.
Massachusetts seems to be having, especially Eastern Massachusetts, a real increase in the cost of housing.
Sure.
So if you're a middle class person, or let's say you've come out of college and you've gotten a decent job and you're looking to maybe invest in a home, do you think it's easy in Massachusetts for people to do that now? Have we outpriced ourselves for the middle class in terms of housing?
Yeah, there are challenges for people to find housing, especially in Eastern Mass, but I would argue throughout the state. I hear from local community advocates all the time about the affordability of housing, and so a couple of thoughts about that. Governor has recently filed a new housing bond package, a $1.5 billion plan for the Commonwealth for the next 5 years to increase the supply of affordable housing and workforce housing. So the difference, affordable housing is the traditional stuff that we think about, subsidized housing, government paid for. The next rung up is the workforce housing, and that's where the police officers, firefighters, teachers that are just starting out would live. And we're trying to provide opportunities for both segments of the marketplace to find resources and increase the availability of supply. The bad news is when you look on the scale of affordability, Massachusetts ranks almost to the bottom. I recently saw one study that indicated that on an affordability scale, Massachusetts was number 47.
Wow.
And yet Massachusetts was number 10 on the list in terms of the overall business climate, and number 1 in terms of overall state. So the good news is that there are other things that are compensating for the high cost of housing. For example, when I deal with employers who are looking to come here to Massachusetts or expand here to Massachusetts, I'm often talking about jobs that are $60,000 or $70,000 or $80,000 in manufacturing and $100,000 or more for office, for professional jobs. So there is an offset towards the high cost of housing, and that's that we have a higher income here than most states do.
I know that here in Western Massachusetts, we pride ourselves on our precision manufacturing sector. And in fact, a couple of years ago, there was an event that I was covering where they took a look at the Connecticut River Valley, essentially from New Haven, going up to Brattleboro, and then looking at all of the precision manufacturing between the state of Connecticut and Western Massachusetts. And we're really almost a worldwide hub for this activity. But we're having problems filling those jobs. I'm sure that you're aware of this. A lot of these shops will actually call back guys who have been retired because their services are in demand. And I know the response locally has been for local manufacturers to work with, like Putnam Vocational High School here in the city, on apprentice programs to try to get people in. But there seems to be sort of a disconnect. Is this something that you've thought about in terms of economic development? It's one thing to bring a business here, but it's another thing to have the workforce for that business to attract them. How do you think about that? How do you deal with that?
Yeah, it's an interesting time here in Massachusetts. When I grew up in public policy, I always thought about how do I create more jobs for people? Today in Massachusetts, we actually have many more jobs available than we do have people that are prepared to fill them. So it's a different challenge for public policymakers. We not only talk about it an awful lot, but we're actually committing resources to it. So first off, the governor noticed this early on, and his stories would be the same as my stories. Whenever I talk to an employer, I would say about half the employers I talk to say they have job openings. And so you hear that once, you hear that twice, you hear that 3 times, it resonates with you. Governor and I go back and talk about it. He actually created what we call a workforce skills cabinet. So I meet every other week with the Secretary of Labor and Workforce Development and the Secretary of Education. The 3 of us combine to form the Workforce Skills Cabinet, and we are talking about and doing things around workforce development on a constant basis. We've increased the funding. I think it's up by like 75%. The governor's a big champion of workforce. If I had a dime for every time the governor mentioned vocational schools and community colleges, I'd be a wealthy man. So he's a big believer in those, and we see that as an important part of the pipeline of getting people into workforce. Precision manufacturing that you talked about out here, absolutely. I recently visited a place, J&E Precision Manufacturing, and a nice growing company in East Hampton.
Okay, we'll go with it.
We'll go with it, next to Westfield?
Yeah, well, not too far from Westfield.
Yeah, okay. So I recently visited them and was so impressed by what I saw, and I had to say to the people that were there, I'm surprised to see somebody who is supporting equipment for the defense industry in this sleepy little town. And how does it work? And they said that we do things that nobody else in the world does. You know, we make parts for helicopters. We make parts for ships, and nobody else in the world can do this, and it's all about our talent. And so we hear that over and over again, that talent is the #1 driving force behind what's happening here in Massachusetts, and so finding ways to support it is really, really important.
Now, I took a little bit, I actually did a little bit of research, believe it or not. And you were the city manager in Chelsea.
Yeah,
correct?
14 years, my hometown.
Okay, so what interested me in that is that Mayor Sarno here in Springfield has a phrase that he likes to use: once a mayor, always a mayor. So you're almost a mayor. Do you look at your job, especially with economic development, from that point of view as the local guy? Because I think that when people are at the level of being a mayor, it's really a grassroots, boots on the ground kind of position. Sure. And you get to know very well the needs of your community. So I'm just wondering, do you approach this sort of as that kind of guy?
Yeah, sure.
The guy who understands I've got a vacant building, or I understand I've got too many kids who are not graduating from high school. I need to have jobs. I need to have more investment. So is that the way that you look at it, only on a state basis?
Yeah. You know, a couple of things come to mind. We all remember the Tip O'Neill line: all politics is local. Right. All government services is local too. At the end of the day, whether you're on the state level or the federal level, you're only creating policy and really not implementing it on the local level where it really matters. So I have a great admiration for mayors. You know, you mentioned Mayor Sarno, Mayor Sullivan in Westfield, Mayor Carson in Chicopee, and others. There's another great line, Lyndon Baines Johnson, who talked about mayors, and he said, you know, he's president of the United States. He says, no matter how tough my day is, I think to myself, it could be worse. I could be a mayor. So it's really tough to be on the local level, and I really appreciate what local officials do. And yes, I am sympathetic, very sympathetic, as is Governor Baker, who's a former selectman in his town. He talks all the time about how important it is to have local government people in his administration working on public policy that affects communities. Our economic development plan was based upon our belief that all good things happen from strong local presences. And we are about trying to revitalize communities. And in revitalizing any single community, we then think that we have an effect on the region. And if we have an effect on the region, then we have an effect on the entire state. So some people might come at it a different way and look at a top-down approach to economic development. But for Governor Baker and myself, the idea is let's strengthen our core, let's build out the circles, and ultimately we'll have a great Commonwealth.
Okay, so I know that you hear this all the time, so I don't mean to pile on. The differences between Western Mass and Eastern Mass in terms of various government services or economic inequalities, we have to watch ourselves out here that we don't come across like whiny babies sometime. But we do understand that, especially after the 2008 crash, that Eastern Massachusetts tended to recover a little bit faster than out here in Western Mass. And we're quite aware that most of the population of the state is east of Worcester. We understand all that. But given that, I have to be a Western Mass partisan here for a moment. And
I'm going to be with you on this one. Go ahead.
Okay. How do you, and I know that people at the Cape feel sort of like this, and there's other people in other parts of the state that feel like this. How do we overcome this idea that not everyone is getting treated equal, especially in terms of state services or at state attention?
Yeah, it's a fair question. A couple of observations. First, to me, the biggest difference between Eastern Mass and Western Mass is when I'm in Western Mass and I ask for a shake, people look at me strange, and I have to remember that I need a milkshake and not a frap. So, the governor and I believe very much in regional equity. And so I spend probably more time in Western Mass than I do in any other section of the state. Our grant programs, the grant programs that I control, within percentage points, I would say that Western Mass gets 50% above what the state average is. So the question is why? Well, I say all the time that I'm really not needed in Boston to help the development in Boston. I have, when I am in my office, I get developers who come in, and it's almost ho-hum. Here's another $1 billion development project. Boston is a world-class city, and competes with New York's and San Francisco's and Paris's of the world. And so I add some value there, but I'm not needed there. When I come further west and start in Worcester and work my way west, I see that's where I really add value. And so the governor has encouraged me to come out to Springfield an awful lot. Springfield's my second home. I spend more time at the La Quinta and Sheridan than I do any place else. So I'll come out for a 2-day trip oftentimes to spend time here. Today, and I'm up and down around Western Mass. We believe that $1 billion in Boston is important, but a $100 million investment out here is equally as important. We believe that I'm talking to a company now in Boston that's looking at a couple thousand new jobs to the state. That's really great. But if I can get 50 or 100 jobs out here, that's really great too. Of course, I'd love to get the 1,000, but we need to get the hundreds before we get to the thousands. We're very high on what's happening out here. The things that I've noticed, and it's easy for me, maybe not as easy for you because you've been here the whole time. You don't see it as much as I do coming in, a new set of eyes that come in. I'm incredibly moved by how collaborative people are here and how focused you are on a plan, that there's a vision and that people are working together on the vision. We mentioned earlier about mayors, the leadership that you have out here, both in city halls and town halls, but also your legislative delegation is really strong. And I get to work with community advocates that are in the innovation space or that are employers. I'm thinking about Stephen Boyd at Boyd Technologies, for instance, who's got me up in Pittsfield working on a Berkshire Innovation Center. I think about Bay State here, where I met a couple of weeks ago and talked about the importance that they are in the region. There are tremendous pieces of the overall pie here that need to be built out, and we feel like we have the resources and we have a similar hope and vision that people of Western Mass do, and so we're about carrying out our initiatives. You mentioned, I was a city manager. I run my life by slogans, and one of the slogans is that you plan the work, and then you work the plan. I feel like the planning part is really strong here, and now it's incumbent upon Governor Baker, myself, legislators, local officials, and all those to support economic development to now carry out that plan, and I'm seeing successes of that.
We were at the Sheriff's Picnic yesterday, Sheriff Cochey's Picnic, which is this incredible political event.
Yes.
And Steve, Cary, and I were interviewing a lot of local candidates. And one of the questions I had for especially people from the Springfield City Council is 2018 is going to be a banner year for the city of Springfield. The the casino, which is right over
next
there,
door, yeah.
behind that wall, is going to be opening.
Yeah.
Union Station is going to be reaching much more of its potential. We're going to be having the commuter rail from Hartford coming in May. Amtrak will probably be then ready to move into Union Station in particular. And we got the Chinese rail car company up on Page Boulevard. They're going to be going into production. And the question I ask people is, what do you see for the city after 2018? Because these have been three monumental economic development issues. And of course, so now what's the next chapter? And I guess I'd like to ask you, when you come into an area like this, a city like Springfield, what do you see? You just mentioned your fresh eyes, and I appreciate that. What do you see as potentials for us that perhaps are on the horizon a bit?
Yeah, we are believers that you build one success on top of another, and you don't necessarily know where you're going to get, but you know what direction you need to go. So I'll harken back to my days as city manager. If I had told the people that had hired me as city manager that we were going to have 33 big projects, including 5 new hotels and all kinds of market rate housing, and the FBI actually located their regional headquarters in Chelsea as I was leaving, I wouldn't have been able to predict all that. But I knew that there was something I needed to do, and it's about strengthening the environment that can then attract investment, and that investment can flourish. I harken back to what I've already said, that strong leadership at city and town halls with shared plans and real collaboration are the building blocks that allow for other things to happen. You've rattled off a number of successes. You build off of those successes for more. How can we help? We've just filed a new life sciences bill. So Governor Baker went out to California to the major biotech conference, which will be in Boston next year, and told the world that we were filing a $500 million plan for life sciences. We call it Mass Life Sciences 2.0, building off of the existing life sciences plan we have. That 2.0 is rooted in manufacturing. It's rooted in helping populations that have not seen connection to life sciences get to life sciences, and it's rooted in regionalizing, bringing more regional equity in the life sciences world. And so there's an example of something that can be built upon. When I was talking with Bay State Health about how we might be able to work together, this is something that came up. So here's an example of what we do. MIT, Governor jokes all the time, the Massachusetts success story. You help establish 2 great institutions. In this case, he was talking about Harvard and MIT, and then you wait 200 years. Innovation just happens over years, and you build off of it. Right. So we're at MIT, and MIT says, we want to compete for a national grant around revolutionary fibers. So someday our clothing will know whether we're hot or cold, and will turn on or off depending upon whether we need to be heated or cooled. We want to compete for a research and development grant, and we need state participation. So the governor sits across from the president of MIT and says, we're in, but we're in as long as you're going to be doing research in Lowell, in Fall River, and in Springfield. And sure enough, MIT figures out a way to connect with each of those communities, and we win the grant. And now we have research going on, and companies are coming along. We don't know what companies are going to come here, but we know that the research and development that we're doing, the spirit of innovation that we have, you think about TechSpring here, and you think about what VVM is doing, you think about Tech Foundry and all the great innovators and incubators that are going on here, we can help build off of that. So what I see in Western Mass is I see affordability, I see a diverse economy. Manufacturing is important, but so is in offices, so is in tourism. And I see an opportunity to build off of those. And I think what you're going to end up seeing is that we're going to help existing companies to strengthen and expand. And we're going to create new opportunities for companies that are looking for those aspects, in addition to a great workforce to locate here.
So I have to now ask you the question that I'm sure you've heard this 5 million times, but we have to, we have to take our advantage to talk to a member of the Baker administration when we have it. EastWest Rail, come on, we need something to actually, right now, as I'm sure you know this, Amtrak runs the Lakeshore Limited, which is the great train from Boston to Chicago, comes through Springfield twice a day. one this direction, one that direction. And that's it.
Yeah.
I mean, if I want to take rail into Boston, I have to drive to Worcester, park my car and go into their very nice Union Station, not as nice as ours, but go into their nice Union Station and take an MBTA train in, which is fine, but we really would like to have at least a consideration.
Yeah, sure.
Sir, I'm asking you very nicely here. And there seems to be reluctance on the Baker administration to sort of like look at this, at least to study it, to see if there is a potential. Not to get you in trouble with your boss, but is there a potential, and do you think that we'll eventually at least get the study?
Yeah, so I think all the time about myself playing a role in a movie, and if having asked that question, you'd expect the person in the movie to say the following: I'm not the transportation secretary, so I'll defer to the transportation secretary, but I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. So East-West is a way of improving the local economy, but not the only way.
Right.
I was moved by Congressman Neal's comments as we were at Union Station for the opening of Union Station. And he talked about how 40 years ago, this was the place where he announced his campaign. And Union Station had been closed for 3 years already. And his announcement was, we're going to get Union Station open. And it took him 40 years. As city manager at Chelsea, I worked on something called the Urban Ring, which was a multimodal transportation around Boston, connecting to all the spokes that went out, commuter rail and rapid transit. I spent 18 years on that. That never happened. It's one thing to work on the long-term things. Mm-hmm. It's another thing to say, you know, can I wait 10 years or 20 years or 30 years for something to happen? What do you do in between? So do I believe that East-West deserves a look-see? Yeah, that's, I'm happy to talk about things like that. But I also believe that you need to focus on the things that you can do today, the things that you can do over the next 5 or 10 years, and the things that may be longer out. And we're laser focused on things that we can do today. So finally, an advanced manufacturing plan, which the governor is looking at right now, that will hopefully be enacted in the fall. Finally, a digital health plan, which Bay State and Tech Spring will champion out in Western Mass. Will create innovation and jobs out here. Working with your great employers like Mass Mutual to strengthen themselves and expand out here are really important as well. And I favor, this is just Jay Ash talking, this isn't the Secretary of Transportation, I favor more a regional approach to economic development. Would it be great to connect Springfield to Boston? Yes, but it would be even greater to have Springfield being the place, the center of economic activity for not only Western Mass, but Connecticut and New York as well. And what do we need to do in order to focus on that? We're really excited about North-South, connections with Hartford and Albany. We're really excited about transportation improvements that are being made out here. 291, you know, everybody is stuck trying to figure out how to get around 291. We're excited about the transportation improvements out there and building the strength of the local economy. If something like East-West can happen down the road, if the federal participation, which used to be plentiful, all of a sudden comes back and makes something possible, that would be great. But in the interim, my job especially is to make sure that we take advantage of things and set ourselves up for 5 or 10 years down the road when we can grow even further out here.
How much does the gridlock in Congress right now and uncertainties on the federal level about funding philosophies affect the Commonwealth, in your opinion? Yeah,
it has a big effect. You know, stability is a great thing, and knowing that when your partners make commitments, they can carry out those commitments are important. You know, we rely upon the federal government for a lot of direction and a lot of funding, and over the years and over the decades, that funding has slipped away. We need them to be partners, and especially places that aren't named Boston or Cambridge that are doing just fine on their own. But even Boston and Cambridge with economic development problems around transportation and housing need help from the federal government as well. So the encouraging thing is that here in Massachusetts, the bipartisanship is working well. And so Republican governor, two Democratic leaders of the legislature, Speaker of the House from Winthrop and Senate President, as you know, from Amherst, and working well together. Working so well, in fact, that the Democratic legislature gave a Republican governor a $1 billion economic development bill, basically $1 billion to go around to cities and towns to give out grants. The governor says to me the other day, Jay, everywhere I go, people say good things about you. I said, Governor, give me another $100 million to give out grant money, and they'll say even better things about me. So I said this to 4,000, there was a conference in Boston a couple of weeks ago, 4,000 legislators and from around the country, and I said, can you imagine being in your state where a democratically controlled legislature gave a Republican governor $1 billion to basically go out and campaign? The reason why I bring it up is that we're doing things in here in Massachusetts, you know, the work between the governor and congressional leaders, the work between the governor and legislators. We're doing things here in Massachusetts that need to be replicated elsewhere. Massachusetts has always been on the forefront of many a thing, including government. And we hope that through our example here, we're creating something that other people will take notice of and try to emulate.
Final question here for you. How did you get involved with public service to begin with? How did you get involved in government on the local level and now on the statewide level?
You know, I was 10 years old, growing up in Chelsea, and a guy 3 doors down from me was running for school committee, and he asked me to hand out some flyers one day, and I was hooked. Wow. So 10 years old, I was my first campaign. Not that I want to date myself, but my first congressional campaign, I was a sophomore in high school, and a state representative from Malden by the name of Ed Markey was running in an open contest. And I got involved with his campaign, got to know him through that campaign, and now Senator Ed Markey is a legend here in Massachusetts. So the sense of giving back in public service was always important to me. When I got out of college, I studied government in college. When I got out of college, I swore that there was one job I wouldn't take, and that was to be a salesman. So, of course, my first job, I was a packaging machinery salesman. Although that's a misnomer because you actually have to sell a product to be a salesman, I think. I never sold a machine, but the local state rep, having taken notice of all the campaigning I did before and the activism that I had in community, asked me to join the staff. So I got to go to the State House, and I worked for 11 years as a legislative aide in the State House. And fortunately, I was with a guy who was rising. So some of your older viewers will remember Richie Vogt, who was a state rep from Chelsea. He was a chairman of Ways and Means, and then the majority leader, who eventually lost to Tom Finneran to be the next Speaker of the House. But Richie was out here an awful lot. Eddie LaLasher, Walter DiFilippi was a big friend of his. Representative Petrolati is still somebody to this day that I talk to about the old days with Representative Vogt. As he was moving up, I got to have more and more experience and a greater insight into government, and so it was really exciting to be part of. When Richie Vogt lost the Speaker's race, I had to leave the State House, and I was fortunate that there was a position as a planning director in my hometown, you know, in Chelsea, and then became city manager for 14 years. Love public service, love getting up every day and wondering how I can improve the lives of people. And love really helping people to collaborate and bringing out the best ideas that they have and then helping those come to fruition. So when I come out here, I love meeting with people, and you know, the Herbie Flores of the world all the way up to Mayor Sano and everybody in between. And really excited about the opportunity that the governor has given me to you know, be in the middle of good public policy back at Beacon Hill, but also to come out to places big and small and try to affect economic development and ultimately the way that people live and prosper.
Well, I've seen you at a lot of events that I've covered for Reminder Publications. I know that you're out here a lot and that you are talking to people about how to improve the economic development and housing situations in Western Massachusetts, and I thank you for that.
Well, thanks, Mike.
And I also thank you for coming on Government Matters today. Folks, keep watching the Government Matters, and we'll keep bringing you insights from people who are in local and state government. Thank you.